Over the years I've finished plenty of boat tests in the dark, but it's not often that I start them when the sun's not out. But we're here in Hamble, it's 5:30 in the morning. We've come down because we're doing a very special test today. We're going to catch the tide and we're heading off for 3 days on a very special boat, the brand new Oyster 595. We're the first to go and test her. And if you think she might look a little familiar, you'd be right, because she's actually the sister ship to the 565, a boat that's been phenomenally successful in a very short space of time. She was originally conceived as one of a package. It was the 565 and the 595. I can't wait to find out what she's like. Well, here we are, we're on our way, we're in the Western Solent. We've gone through the arduous process of putting the main up, which took all of about 20 seconds and involved 2 buttons. We've got a northerly breeze. What are we blowing? So it's 10 to 12 knots at the moment. We're expecting it probably to pick up a little bit later. We're heading out through the Needles. We're going to hoist the kite and send it down west. Okay. We'll just go for the kite up now. Typically, of course, the breeze just picks up just as we're trying to get it out of the sock. That feels like the kite's up. There we go. Kite's up and set just in time for us to head through Hurst Narrows. Everything's close to hand. I like all of this. Power winch buttons just there, main sheet there, secondary, primary, wheel, autopilot. It's all here, you don't really have to go very far. I like it. So we're just out past the Needles now, and we put in probably 4 or 5 jibes, I guess. And it's been perfect conditions, 10 to 15 knots of breeze, just rolling through the jibe now, easing out the main as we go through. We've got into quite a nice little routine here actually, with our asymmetric kite. The breeze was up in the northeast, so it meant that we couldn't straight line it down through the Needles channel, which gave us all a bit of practice at jibing. And so long as you take it slowly, it's fine. But the one thing that comes out of it is that all the controls you need are really close to hand. I mean, I'm sitting here having just jibed the main and easing the main out, got nice controls so I can get the balance on the rudder just right as I heat it up a bit. The controls are very close to hand, both for the helm and the crew, and you can move across the boat without getting in each other's way. It's a really nicely arranged cockpit, that's for sure. We're now up to about sort of 18, 19 knots true, and we've got a couple of knots of tide under us as well. So we're rattling down towards the west. Next headland now will be St Albans Head, but that's a bit of a way off. But it's a nice opportunity to sort of settle down now into feeling what she's like in a straight line with the kite up. And very nice is the answer to that. I particularly like the twin wheel setup because it means not just upwind but downwind. You've got a really nice line of sight down the windward side of the boat. You feel more like you're sailing a boat than if you're stuck in the middle where you just can't see anything. Nicely balanced. We're cracking along at, how quickly we go. Oh, 10 knots we're doing. 10 knots through the water with a couple of knots under us in the tide. 12 knots over the ground. That's not a bad way to go west. So it's just turned 11 o'clock and we've just gone round St Albans Head there. We had a lovely kite run all the way across Christchurch Bay, past Swanage, down to that headland. And we've since now headed up, we're on a 2-sail reach, we dropped the kite and we're tracking the Jurassic Coast, which is pretty spectacular in itself. So what was interesting was that when we dropped the kite, we then pulled out the headsail and headed up, and there was quite a swell off St Albans Head and we were able to surf down the waves. This is a big boat, but she was picking up in just 18 knots of breeze and surfing downwind, and we were doing over 12 knots at times. Perfectly under control, but she really does pick up and go, and that's just under full main and a headsail. And when it comes to the balance, you definitely feel that this is where this boat, and I remember this being the case with the 565 as well, this is where they really excel. Power reaching. When you've got a little bit of heel on, you've got some pressure on the leeward rudder and the whole boat just tightens up and feels really quite sort of directionally stable, I guess, if you like. In fact, so much so that you could pretty much just lock off the wheel and she'll just carry on in a straight line. Probably not the best way of going any distance, but you get the point. Now, this is going to sound a bit weird, but one of my favourite viewpoints on an Oyster is from where you are right now, looking aft. It's so distinctive, the wraparound windows and the flush deck, and it always looks they all look such powerful boats, particularly on this point of sail where you're reaching along. Of course, they are powerful boats, and this is no different. We're cracking along at 10 knots along here in flat water. We've only got 16, 17 knots of breeze. This boat is no slouch at all. Fixed bowsprit, 2 anchor rollers in there, but also of course a position to fly an asymmetric kite from. You can probably hear we're cracking along at the moment. Just had a little gust, back up to 10 knots again. In keeping with sort of the modern Oyster style, they're about 105, 110% overlapping headsails. So the jib tracks just come back to here. And then just on the outside, on the gunnel, we've got a sheet lead for when you're reaching, you want to sort of open up those angles. Full width chain plates as normal. But the thing that really strikes me, at least from a first sight, is look at the width of the side decks. Surprisingly wide, totally clutter free, really easy to walk up and down. Plenty of handholds, of course, and whether it's a handhold, the guard wire, whether it's handholds here, but loads of space, dead easy to move about on.
So, after a decent morning sail west, we headed into Warbarrow Bay for a brief pause to take stock. From a sailing point of view, she'd already started to grow on me, but I couldn't get one thing in particular off my mind. This boat costs £2.4 million, yet before she'd even been launched, 16 had been sold. That's a serious endorsement in itself. So our brief stop provided an opportunity to take a closer look around the deck in search of more clues. And once the note-taking and reporting was complete, we set off for Portland Marina via Lulworth Cove.
In all the years of going backwards and forwards, it's the first time I've been in there in a boat. And talk about taking a 60-footer into a small cove. I'm glad it had a bow thruster and a stern thruster, because that made it very easy to manoeuvre, and probably sort of just highlighted how easy this boat is to handle, certainly under engine, really nimble. With the bow and stern thruster, you can literally just turn the boat around on its keel, and we never felt like we were really at any risk there. We just felt rather large perhaps compared to some of the other boats that were in there. So that was nice. And then we came out of there and we headed over towards Portland, where we're going to spend the night. But being the dedicated sailors and boat testers that we are, when the sun came out, cameraman Richard, who's standing behind this camera, said, I want to go and film in the sun. So that's what we did. We turned around and we went upwind and we did some filming upwind in the sun, and it was fantastic. We had sort of 15 to 18 knots true breeze, full sail, bashing along. In fact, we weren't bashing along, we were just sliding along at over 9 knots upwind. Pretty effortless, really. The boat, she could sail herself upwind quite comfortably. So that was nice. So anyway, we turned around and came back, and of course, not wishing to waste a minute of the day, the crew are now busy putting the kite up. It's non-stop. It's great.
Interestingly, none of us aboard had ever taken a boat of this size into Portland Marina, and despite quite breezy conditions and having to reverse through a tight gap to our berth for the night, it was a doddle. But once is never enough, so the following morning we put her through her paces again.
As a bit of a traditionalist, from knowing what bow thrusters were like many years ago, I've never been particularly keen on them, to be honest, but modern bow thrusters, and now when you've got bow and stern, it's a completely different deal. You can also do things like this.
With the manoeuvrability test complete, it was back out to sea, starting with an upwind leg along the Jurassic coast before then heading south into the English Channel.
So day 2 turned out to be quite a cracker, actually. We're just heading back now after quite a long day's sail. It's quite light to start with, and we ended up beating out of Weymouth along the shoreline in really quite light conditions, down to about sort of 6 knots of breeze at times, which in itself was quite interesting because this boat slips along really quite nicely in sub 10 knots of breeze. So that was pretty encouraging. And then, because we are the consummate professionals, we went in search of some sunshine for some good shots of the kite up in the sun. And that meant travelling pretty much halfway out into the English Channel, where we found the sun and we found some breeze. It was great fun. And it also made it absolutely clear that what this boat does really well is cruising around at 9 or 10 knots. Whatever you do, you look at the log, it's 9 or 10 knots. That makes calculating your distance to get home quite easy, doesn't it? You just divide by 10, simple. So, having been out towards the edge of the shipping lanes, just in the middle of the English Channel, we're now fetching back. The breeze is up at around 20 knots, going along really quite nicely. And the plan is to head to Warbarrow Bay, or maybe Lulworth Cove. We'll see what it's like when we get there. Drop the hook, have a night in the wild.
The focus so far had been on her sailing, but this evening it was time to take a closer look down below. And at rest, the 595 is just as plush and comfortable as you'd expect. So too is the finish throughout, which is immaculate. From the well-proven longitudinal galley on the port side to the subtle and spacious owner's cabin, the layout and finish throughout is a familiar one. And for good reason, because it works. But there are also some subtle clues as to how things have moved on, particularly in the forward cabin. Here, the finer entry for the bow results in more vertical topsides that give the feeling of greater volume and headroom. And when darkness fell and the accommodation lighting came on, the 595 saloon was in the mood to play host for the evening.
So what's in store for day 3? Well, once we're out of here, we head back to Weymouth to drop someone off. Then we turn around and we're heading back up to Hamble. Now that's going to be interesting because it looks like it's going to be dead upwind all the way.
And it was. Starting with fairly light conditions, the sea state and wind speed built as we made our way towards the Needles Channel.
When we planned this trip and started looking at the weather that was in store, it became quite clear that we were facing 3 days of northeasterlies, which is fine when you're going that way. But it was also quite clear that the 3rd day was going to involve a 50-mile beat home. And that's exactly what we've had today. It's been pretty interesting. We've had 20 knots true, sometimes a little bit more than that. And coming round St Albans Head just over there in the distance when the tide turned against the breeze meant that the sea state picked up and it got really quite lumpy. Just what we wanted. Because then we got to see what this boat's really like when it gets a little punchy. And I have to say, she's a great boat upwind, there's no question about that. She doesn't slam at all. She's very soft motion going upwind. She's very easy to keep in the groove. A lot of that is to do with the twin rudders and the shape of the hull. So she's a very well balanced boat and she does go to windward extremely well. The other thing that's really noticeable, she's so quiet. Down below, she's really quiet, eerily quiet, almost to the point that you wonder if it really is blowing that hard outside. So here we are, back in the Solent after 3 days of sailing. We did around 120, 130 miles. We moored in a marina, we dropped the hook, we went upwind, we went downwind. It's been great fun. It's been really, really interesting. And this is a boat that really grows on you. She makes a big impact from the moment you step aboard, mainly how beamy and how large she is. But actually, it doesn't take long before she shrinks down into something that feels really very manageable and, let's face it, very, very comfortable indeed. So I like it. It's been a privilege actually to be able to spend this much time on a brand new boat that the company has invested so much time and effort into. And that might sound like sales speak, but I've been following and sailing Oysters for quite some time now, and I know how much this boat means to them, and I can see why. She's a really, really lovely boat.